Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Abbott. I'm the Director of the Office of Educator Effectiveness at DESE, and I'm thrilled to see everybody here today to learn more about this work. I want to start by contextualizing what we're going to be sharing today in a larger goal here at the department, one that is articulated through the department's educational vision. This vision is grounded in a commitment to ensuring that all students, particularly students from historically underserved groups and communities, will have equitable opportunities to excel in all content areas across all grades. So what does this look like? This requires culturally and linguistically sustaining classrooms and school practices that will support all students to thrive by creating affirming environments where all students have a sense of belonging, engage in deeper learning, and are held to high expectations with targeted support. This is really our collective vision around which the department is focusing all of its policies, supports, and resources in the coming years. And the model rubrics we're going to be talking about today are deeply grounded in this vision. In the Office of Educator Effectiveness within the Center for Instructional Support, our mission is to create the conditions needed to bring this educational vision to life, the conditions that support the preparation, the development, and the retention of a diverse and effective educator workforce so that all of our students can thrive. And that means setting the expectations, setting the standards, if you will, for effective practice based on what we know makes a difference for kids. And what we know is that effective educators are those who nurture and cultivate all students' academic achievement, cultural and linguistic competence, sociopolitical awareness, and emotional intelligence. These priorities and these skills, while previously alluded to in the rubrics for educator evaluation, are now more clearly integrated across all four standards, from curriculum and instruction to professional culture. And they serve as the foundation for effective teaching and leading going forward. So the model rubric updates are part of a broader effort to more closely align our frameworks for effective practice with our evolving understanding of what great teaching and leading it looks like and should be. So over the last 3 years, we have been working to update expectations and standards for effective teaching and leading across the career continuum, starting with preparation and moving up through induction and mentoring and continuous improvement. From the guidelines that inform how teachers and leaders are prepared to the performance assessments for aspiring principals and teacher candidates, to the development of a model handbook for principal induction and mentoring, to the revised evaluation rubrics. The anti-racist, inclusive, multilingual, and multicultural principles of the educational vision are woven throughout. And this allows educators and their mentors to really lean into these principles throughout the career continuum. Today, we are focusing on the model rubrics specifically. So I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon now to dive in.
Great, thank you, Claire. So model rubric updates. DESE has the responsibility to periodically update the model system for educator evaluation in order to ensure that it continues to be an exemplar for districts. So as such, it's incumbent on us to update the model rubrics to reflect our evolving understanding of effective practice as being that which is equitable, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of all of our students. So these updates, as you'll see, are intended to more explicitly integrate culturally and linguistically sustaining practices throughout the rubric. So this really aligns closely with DESE's educational vision. This means that cultural proficiency is not its own separate indicator, but rather lives throughout all of the other indicators as a core component of what it means to be an effective educator. So as we make these updates, we're also working to strengthen the rubrics as tools to support meaningful goal setting, feedback, and professional learning. So that's really meant clarifying, streamlining, and being as specific as possible about effective practice. So this work has been underway for several years now. We first engaged with the principal and teacher advisory cabinets in the 2020-21 school year to really study our EdEval system through an anti-racist, culturally responsive lens. And this group of educators really elevated the critical need for updates to the rubric that center equitable, inclusive, and culturally responsive practices as being really foundational to this work. So in 2021-22, we developed initial drafts with more input from educators, students, and families, and continued work with PAC-TAC, as well as roundtables across the state with students and families. This year, we piloted the administrator rubric with a small number of districts, and we continue to build out the teacher rubric. The teacher rubric will be piloted next year and released as the model rubric in 24-25. So as I mentioned, these updates are really the direct result of multiple cycles of feedback and collaboration with educators, students, and family members over the past two or more years, really. In addition to working closely with PAC-TAC, like I said, we held roundtables with students, families, and educators across the state. We engaged with external advisors from educator associations, met with advisory groups with expertise in special education and English learner education, and collected feedback through an online survey. So I just want to say how grateful we are to all of the individuals who shared their perspectives and lent their expertise to this project. And you can find the list of these contributors in the acknowledgement section of the rubric. So if any of you are on the call with us today, thank you so much for your support. We'll share the link to the draft updated rubric so you can take a look, but I wanted to share a few examples so you can see a little bit about how the language is changing. So here's the current rubric element for student engagement. Consistently uses instructional practices that are likely to motivate and engage most students in the content of the lesson. And here's the updated language from the updated draft. So you can see we've expanded on that to set the expectation that proficient means authentic engagement for all, not most students. And we're also trying to be really explicit about what this looks like. So it's providing students opportunity to make choices, apply their learning in relevant and real-world contexts, engaging with their peers, and building on students' strengths and frames of reference. So the rubric is also designed to reinforce evidence-based practices, which you can see in this update to well-structured units and lessons, where we've shifted language to really focus on curricular literacy, or an educator's ability to skillfully implement curricular materials. And then here's just one more example where you can see where we've updated high expectations. I mean, not just communicating high standards, but providing students with the supports that they need to meet those high standards. So this updated element also brings in practices from another element in the current rubric called quality of effort in work. So it's an example of a place where we've consolidated to try to reduce redundancy and streamline. Another update you'll see is a shift from element level performance rating descriptions to indicator level performance rating descriptions. So what this means is instead of having those 4 performance level categories for the 33 elements, which we know has made for a pretty long and cumbersome rubric, there's performance levels for the 12 indicators. This was a change that was recently made in the superintendent rubric and has been received positively. So as you can see, this format makes the proficient description really central to the rubric, because this is the rigorous yet attainable practice that's expected for all educators. So below that proficient descriptor are the other 3 performance levels, which represent variations from proficient in the quality, scope, or consistency of that practice. And so while most of the rubric focuses on the educator's actions and behaviors, the student learning indicator is really intended to be about the impact of those actions relative to student learning. So in the current rubric, student learning is defined squarely in terms of academics. And while we know that this is critical, an educator's impact on students extends far beyond test scores and other measures of academic growth. And so you'll see in this updated draft that an additional element has been added to the student learning indicator to recognize educators' impact on non-academic outcomes as well, such as students' engagement in learning and their sense of belonging. And so as with the current rubric, there are no performance levels associated with this indicator. It's the expectation that evidence of impact be considered alongside evidence of practice in determining a rating for standard 2. So that's an overview of the updates. And so now we'll turn to the pilots. Again, feel free to use the Q&A feature if any questions are popping up for you as we go. So this year, we piloted the administrator rubric with 4 groups of school leaders and supervisors from a diverse set of districts across the state. They received leadership coaching focused around the 5-step cycle from CLE, the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity. So this included self-assessment and goal setting, targeting focus indicators from the updated rubric, and tracking progress throughout the year towards those goals through ongoing collaborative conversations. I'll share some of their reflections on the process in a moment, but we'll be releasing case studies later this summer that really provide more detail on their experience, promising practices, and supports and conditions necessary for success. So I'll pause to let you read some of the reflections from the pilot participants. Forced me to be more thoughtful and intentional, see it as an important piece of bigger work, really about reflection and growth as a professional, making the process coherent and authentic and relevant, and really using this as an opportunity to focus in on equity gaps in the district. So that's just some of the takeaways. So based on our conversations with school and district leaders, these 3 themes really emerged. Relationships were essential, specifically the cultivation of trust and collaboration between leaders doing this work together. Time was critical, making space for these conversations, the reflection and discussion needed as a leadership team around topics of equity and culturally responsive practices, especially if there were significant adaptive shifts in communication and understandings that were taking place. And finally, coherence. The pairs that found this most success were the ones that integrated a vision for culturally and linguistically sustaining culture into their individual goals and their school improvement goals and their overall district mission, so that they could really prioritize key equity-centered practices, align the work around those practices, and hold themselves accountable. So building on this year's pilot, there's some opportunities for professional learning available for next school year for school leaders in alignment to and support of the practices in the rubric. So this fall, the department will host and facilitate a community of practice for school and district leaders throughout the Commonwealth to exchange ideas on effective practices, strategies, and resources for implementing the new school level administrator rubric. There's an interest form that you can fill out by June 30th. We can share the link to that. There's also going to be an aspiring principal fellowship program scheduled to begin in the spring. It's going to be a 1-year program aimed at helping educators in Massachusetts who want to become school leaders. And it will focus on job embedded and evidence-based practices promoting cultural responsiveness, equity, and anti-racism. So this program will equip fellow leaders with the knowledge and tools to create a school environment that fosters excellence for all of their students. And I also encourage you to check out DESE's new catalog for lots of other professional learning opportunities and resources coming out if you have not yet. So we'll turn now to the teacher rubric pilot for next school year. We really hope that you'll consider piloting the teacher rubric in your district, because we see this as an opportunity to reinforce equitable evidence-based practices across the district, strengthen evaluator skills in providing high quality feedback to educators, and also to provide us with direct feedback on the draft rubric and the supports that are needed for it to be successful. The teacher rubric pilot will be open to all Massachusetts districts and schools. We just ask that you register through this link as soon as possible or by August 10th so that we can plan appropriately for trainings and supports. And we'll share the registration link in the chat. For participating districts, we will be offering training and support in the form of a district team planning workshop focused on best practices for culturally responsive educator evaluation. This will likely happen on Zoom in the early fall. We'll facilitate at least 2, if not more, in-person calibration training workshops for the evaluators over the course of the school year. And so these workshops will be using OPTIC, aligned to the updated rubric and focusing in on identifying observable evidence and providing high quality feedback on a subset of elements. There will also be a virtual community of practice for teachers and evaluators geared towards building that collective understanding of the practices in the updated rubric. This will meet at least every other month and be an opportunity for educators to share and discuss best practices as we learn together. And also to support the pilot, we are developing a list of vendors that are prepared to integrate the updated rubric into their technology platforms for the next school year. So there are 4 vendors that have been approved under this RFR so far. We're finalizing those contracts and that list should be available very soon. But those on the list currently support a large portion of districts in Massachusetts. So if you're already contracted with any of them for educator evaluation platforms, you'll likely be able to access forms aligned to the updated rubric. And we'll provide more information about how to do that. So here's the criteria that these vendors have been approved based on: experience partnering with schools and districts to provide tech solutions for educator evaluation, capability to integrate this in a timely way for next school year, their products supporting effective and efficient implementation of educator evaluation in alignment with our framework. The vendors also provide training and technical assistance to support use of their platforms, and they provided a reasonable cost structure. So again, if you're interested in reaching out to them, you'll be able to find their contact information on our webpage in the next couple of weeks. So we're going to have time.
Oh, Shannon, I was wondering if now would be a good time to pause perhaps and answer a couple questions about the teacher rubric pilot.
Yes.
Since before we transition to the next section.
Yes.
So I can read them out loud if that would be helpful, Shannon. One of the questions is about collective bargaining and the responsibilities of a district to collectively bargain the new rubrics. Do you want to take that?
Sure, yes. So the rubrics will need to be collectively bargained. The districts that are planning to pilot the rubric next year most of them have already started talking with their local unions about what that could look like. But again, the timeline for implementation will vary depending on the local context.
And I think a related question also came in, Shannon, about whether or not a district needs to pilot with all of their teachers or can pilot with a subset of teachers.
Yes. You can pilot with as many or as few teachers as makes sense in your district.
I think the last time that these rubrics were updated, we followed a similar timeline where the draft rubric was made available for a pilot a year in advance of the rubric becoming the model rubric. And districts that participated in the pilot approached the collective bargaining process differently depending on the unique context. And similarly, they piloted the draft rubric with different numbers of teachers depending on what their local bargaining unit was comfortable implementing. So it's hard to put exact parameters around it because it really does come down to a local decision around what makes the most sense for your population of educators and what works in the context of your collective bargaining agreement.
So we just wanted to share some of the other questions that might be on your mind right now before we move over to our next topic. Again, this question was just asked, do all teachers in the district need to participate in the pilot? And no, you can pilot with a subgroup, but we ask that you attest to securing agreement from those teachers for their participation. So this is a voluntary participation. And can the draft rubric be used for evaluation during the pilot? Yes. Though it is in a draft form, the updated rubric is of comparable rigor and meets regulatory requirements, and so it can be used for evaluation. However, districts can choose to enter into an MOU with their local collective bargaining units to hold teachers harmless based on this previously established criteria. So there's flexibility there with what makes sense in your context. And there is no limit to the number of districts that can pilot. Please just register as soon as possible so that we can plan appropriately for trainings and supports. But we hope that the more teachers participate, the better, so that we can get more feedback on implementation. Okay. So final thing we just wanted to share today before we open it up for additional Q&A are just the implementation resources that are available to you to support educator evaluation in your districts. So first, there's the focus indicators, which I know many of you are familiar with. We have had a longstanding recommendation for districts to prioritize a subset of indicators in supervision and evaluation, and many districts are using this approach. You might call it power elements or focus indicators, but really the idea is that you're prioritizing specific practices within the rubric for deeper support, feedback, goal setting. In line with this, for the last several years, we've identified a set of recommended focus indicators for teachers and administrators specific to the upcoming school year. We see this as really an opportunity to streamline the process, guide meaningful goal setting, help focus feedback and support throughout the year. So for the 23-24 school year, the focus indicators have not shifted much from the last 2 years. You can see for the administrators, we've added evaluation as a recommended focus indicator based on this updated rubric. And so we encourage districts to use these focus indicators to support your process throughout the year. And we hope that centering the work around these areas can bring communities together around critical teaching and leading practice and focus your supports to these essential areas of practice. I also want to note that while the focus indicators for administrators have been updated to align with the new model rubric, the focus indicators for teachers, mostly like those numeric codes, are based on the current model rubric. So that said, districts are encouraged to use these whether or not they're piloting the updated rubrics, because culturally and linguistically sustaining practices have really been integrated throughout the resource. So in fact, these can serve as a really effective bridge from the current rubric to the updated version as you're working to introduce and more deeply embed these practices into expectations. These focus indicators should be available on our website today or tomorrow. They're in the process of being posted. And so in addition to the focus indicators, there are lots of other tools and resources available to support a meaningful and culturally responsive evaluation process. So we first released these resources in 2020 based on the unique context of the pandemic, and have found them to be pretty supportive and helpful. And so we've continued to update them each year. So there's a self-assessment tool, there's a SMARTY goal setting protocol, which includes inclusive and equitable goal setting. There's a resource around engaging families in the educator evaluation, around meaningful evidence collection, and then there's staff and student feedback surveys that are aligned to the focus indicators. So we just hope that this suite of resources can help align the process around these essential areas of practice. And so finally, we'll share a bunch of links with more resources and information. So everything about the Model Rubric Update project, including the rubrics, are available on this first link that we'll share. We'll drop all of these in the chat. The implementation resources. We also have a page dedicated to supporting culturally and linguistically sustaining practice. So this includes the department's definition of what this means, as well as a growing set of resources around this. And then DESE's educational vision and catalog of aligned resources, which all of this is deeply grounded in, is available through this additional link that we'll share. So with that, we can open it up for further questions.
Dan and I can share some that have been coming into the Q&A if that would be helpful. One question is, will DESE be updating any of the observation or formative and summative forms along with the new model rubrics?
So those forms will be updated. If you're using those tech platforms, they'll be updated through those tech platforms.
And we will be updating those forms as the rubrics become the part of the model system as well. So over the summer, we'll be reviewing the forms that are associated with the school level administrator model system. And then next summer, when the new model rubric for classroom teachers rolls out, we will be making parallel updates to any forms for the teacher evaluation. And just as a reminder, all these forms are optional as well. So you're able to adopt or adapt those forms as you need to meet the context of your local environment as well. There's a question about whether or not anything will change in the reporting of each standard. And then also, will vendors be providing the same support for free following the pilot? All of the reporting requirements remain the same. In fact, the 4 standards remain the same and the definitions of the standards remain the same. So what you are responsible for reporting to DESE through EPIMS will remain exactly the same, regardless of which rubric you use. The vendors that are part of this memorandum of understanding, or this master services agreement, are already providing specific supports to districts, and they already had to demonstrate that level of support in order to be part of this master services agreement. So they should be already providing any partner districts with the requisite amount of technical support in order to utilize their platforms efficiently. Shannon, would you add anything to that? Because I know you were more involved in the selection of those vendors.
No.
There is a question about how districts should think about measuring practice associated with indicator 2C in the teacher rubric. And that indicator is the student learning indicator. This is an indicator that, as Shannon noted, does not have any specific performance descriptors associated with it. What it does is it articulates the expectation that academic outcomes and now non-academic outcomes will be taken into account when thinking about an educator's practice overall for standard 2. As you all know, historically, and this will remain in place, there is a requirement that any statewide assessment be used in this for indicator 2C where available, and that's usually MCAS. But MCAS is actually only applicable to about 12 to 15% of educators. So that leaves a lot of teachers and leaders for whom a different set of evidence would be applicable for academic outcomes. And then obviously non-academic outcomes include a host of different measures or signals. This is one of the things we're going to be looking at and partnering with our pilot districts to learn more about how to do well. I think the measures associated with 2C will vary. It will vary depending on what districts have in place relative to common assessments. It could be surveys. It could be other metrics of student experiences. It could be teacher level in terms of trying to better understand the experiences that students are having relative to sense of belonging or other non-academic outcomes. So this will be one of the explicit questions we dig into with our pilot districts to better understand what are meaningful metrics of not just academic outcomes, but also non-academic outcomes, and what feels meaningful to a teacher when it comes to understanding their impact on a student's experience in the classroom. Shannon, you're welcome to jump in, or I'll keep going in terms of the questions. We're getting some great questions in the Q&A. There is one question just about what is driving the need for these changes. Shannon alluded to the department's responsibility early on in this conversation, and it is our responsibility to update the model system, including the rubrics, as needed to ensure that they continue to represent an exemplar for effective teacher and leader supervision and evaluation. And over the last 10, almost 12 years since the statewide model system for educator evaluation was rolled out, we've learned a lot about what effective practice looks like relative to student outcomes in particular. And a lot of that learning has centered on the importance of culturally and linguistically sustaining practice. Back when the original model rubrics were rolled out in 2012, they already had a designated indicator for cultural proficiency. And over the last 10 years, the importance of those skills has only become more obvious. So we worked really deeply with a lot of stakeholders, representatives of from our teacher and principal advisory cabinets, to explore how to center those practices more effectively. And the overwhelming recommendation was to integrate them throughout all 4 standards, rather than have them live in their own distinct indicator, such that when we talk about what effective practice is, whether it's about curriculum instruction or professional culture, we're talking about practice that is culturally and linguistically sustaining. So that really drove the original impetus to make these most recent updates to the rubrics. And then the department's development of its educational vision that really centers the experiences and the commitments to our most underserved children really further motivated the shifts in these rubrics. So we're really excited about the coherence that these rubrics are part of when it comes to the ways in which the department and districts already are thinking differently about effective practice.
There are a couple of questions in here about CAP, the Candidate Assessment of Performance, which is the performance assessment for teacher candidates. And yes, the CAP will be updated to align with updated rubrics. We're going to start with updating the PSTs, the professional standards for teachers, which are the set of standards and indicators around which teachers are expected to be prepared. So a first draft of that is going to come out at the end of the summer, early fall. And then a working group is going to be convened over the course of next year to make updates to the full PST guidelines as well as the CAP guidelines, so that the whole system can come into alignment. So look out for more information about that working group. And then there's a question about updating rubrics for other educators other than administrators and teachers. And yes, so we are starting to examine the best processes for updating those rubrics, including for CISP and the superintendent. So more to come there. And I think the only other questions are around, will the slides be shared? Yes, we'll be sharing the slides and sharing the recording. So you'll have all of this information accessible.
There's one more question just about what is subject to collective bargaining, and specifically, can the new school level administrator rubric be edited or changed through collective bargaining? The answer is yes. The only thing that needs, the things that need to be retained in any rubric for educator evaluation are the 4 standards and the relevant indicators that fall under each of the standards. And then there's an expectation that any rubric be of comparable rigor to the model rubrics. But if there are specific language changes or ways in which you'd like to adapt the model rubrics during the process of collectively bargaining what the best instrument is for your district, that is subject to your collective bargaining process.
Any more questions? If there are no more questions, we'll share our contact information. Obviously, another question just popped in, but here's our email addresses so that you can reach out to us if you have additional questions after today. We'll also follow up with all of this information over email, so it's accessible. Let's see, we can take a look at this question.
This is a great question. First of all, I think it's terrific that various graduate programs are already looking to integrate components of these rubrics into their programming. And we've received this question not just related to program supervisors for school leaders, but also for teachers. So how do we support our supervisors of pre-service candidates to really provide that meaningful feedback to candidates, particularly if or when they themselves are building their own skill set around culturally responsive practices. We are actively at the department exploring different professional development and professional learning opportunities for mentor teachers, supervising practitioners, and program supervisors in this area. So look out for more information. There will be particular professional learning opportunities for program supervisors next year. And we're exploring professional development opportunities for supervising practitioners as well. Shannon, do you want to answer the question about the technology platforms?
Yes, I was just checking it, but it makes sense to say it out loud. So we'll be sharing the information about the technology platforms in the next couple of weeks as we're finalizing the contracts for that master agreement. It seems like the questions have slowed down. So again, feel free to reach out to us at any time. But thank you for joining us today. We hope this answered some of your questions about the pilot and the rubric updates, and we hope you'll consider piloting next year. Thank you. Have a great rest of your afternoons, everyone.